All right, so before we get started, I might just, we've got a couple of the devices up on stage here, so I'll just quickly show you guys what these things actually are.
Now, which one's that?
Okay, so this guy here is one of the older direct current stimulation devices, or TDCs. So very quickly, the way that this works, as Paul sort of described quite nicely before, this is the one where you actually apply a very light current to the brain. So you apply a current that runs between these two electrodes here, and the idea is that some of this current actually passes through the skull and runs across the surface of the brain. So this is a very subtle way of trying to manipulate how the neurons naturally fire. So you can hopefully either increase that natural firing or, in the opposite case, decrease that natural firing. So this is becoming gradually more and more sophisticated.
Nigel, can you not call that older? That's the only one we have.
Sorry, Mark. Funding's tough up in Queensland. So this one here is a slightly newer device of the older one. As we can see, there's a lot less wires now, which is quite nice. There's a couple more electrodes as well. As you can see with our older device there, the electrodes are quite large. These are now looking to try and get that current a little bit more focal, so we can try and really target certain areas of the brain. So that's direct current stimulation. When you hear TDCS or direct current stimulation, this is what we're talking about.
Which one are you going to use tonight on Gary?
So the other device that we have in the lab here, or in the now giant lab, is this device here, which is Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation, or TMS. So as Paul again mentioned before, this works in a slightly different way in that the aim of TMS is to actually try and make the brain fire itself. So the way that TMS works is we have some copper coils that sit in this coil here. We run a very, very brief, so we're talking under a thousandth of a second current through this coil, and that generates a magnetic field which goes out in this kind of direction. So when we pop this onto somebody's head, that magnetic field passes with fairly minimal resistance through the skull and then creates another really small current on anything that conducts electricity underneath, like the outside of your brain. So generally this is used in two different ways. So the first way is what's called single pulse TMS. So in this way we can apply the coil to different areas of the brain, and we're going to try this out in a minute with Gary, and we can actually make different areas activate. Now, we use this in the lab to try and test sort of how excitable different areas of the brain are. So we can use this to try and determine if someone's doing a task, which parts sort of come online at different points. We can also use this to test the difference between healthy people and people that have some kind of a brain disorder, to try and find out where the differences in activity are between the two different groups. So the second way that we use this is what's called repetitive TMS. So instead of just giving single pulses with repetitive TMS, as the name suggests, we actually give trains of stimulation which try to mimic the way that the brain naturally fires, and particularly when it fires during learning and memory. So the really important part about repetitive TMS is that it can actually change the brain's activities for a period of time after the stimulation. So usually for around about 30 to 60 minutes. So this is important because what we can do is we can use this in the lab again to try and either increase brain activity in certain regions or decrease it in that region, and then afterwards have the person perform a task and see whether they've got better or worse, and in that way try and infer whether that brain area was actually involved in the task. Importantly, this is also the type that is used in the clinic as well. So slightly differently again, instead of just coming in one day and having a single session, patients will come in over multiple days, say maybe once every day for about a month. And the aim with this is to actually try and produce longer lasting changes in brain activities.
Nigel, we probably will have some questions about it, but I'll hold over any questions until we've completed the demonstration and also talk to a home user as well. So hang on to your questions, sir, and anyone else who's catching my eye wanting to ask questions.
I need a microphone.
Yes.
Behind you.
Thank you.
Yeah, behind.
Make sure you keep it in your left hand, Gary.
Okay.
Okay, so we're actually going to try out some of the single pulse TMS now on Gary.
Oh, what should we look for? Should we look for anything in particular, Nigel?
Yep. So I'll take you on a quick tour of the brain before we get started. So that's it, Gary. If you just look to your left, please. There we go. Okay, so we've got the frontal region up here, which is generally involved in executive functions, planning for the future, those kinds of things. Down the side here, we have what's called the temporal lobe, which is really important in memory. Back here, we have the parietal cortex, which is important in sensory integration. And at the back here, we have what's called the occipital cortex, which is generally involved in vision. The area that we're interested in today is this strip which sort of runs down along just above Gary's ear here. And this is the part of the brain that's involved in controlling all of our movement. So it's called the motor cortex. So one of the really interesting and important things about the motor cortex is it's actually organised in a really specific way. So the parts of the brain that control facial movement, smiling, talking, these kinds of things are down here. As you move up, we get to the areas that control our very dexterous hand movements. As we move further up still, we get sort of arm and what do you call this? The lumbar parts, shoulder. The shoulder, lumbar parts of the body. And up towards the centre here, going into the middle of the brain, we get the leg area. So we can actually use TMS to target specific parts of the brain. Okay, so what we're going to be looking for here, I'm going to get Gary just to pop his hand out, just down a little bit more than that.
Just so everyone can see.
So everyone can see. He's got a big, long arm, so that makes life easier. So what we're going to aim for first is we're going to see whether we can get Gary's hand area. So we'll just get you to look straight ahead there, Gary. Okay, here we go. All right, did everybody see that? So you can hear a little click as the machine goes off. So it's going off now. You can see Gary is just sort of giving you a little bit of a wave there. That's nice, isn't it? Hello. Okay. So as we start to move a little bit further up towards Gary's arm area, towards his shoulder area, I might just have to turn the machine up a little bit for this one.
Oh, dear.
What have you got yourself into, Gary? All right.
Just lost control. Ooh.
Okay, so you can see we really start to get much more global movements of the whole arm there.